Today on the Ferment Station, let's talk about fortification and dilution. Welcome to the Ferment Station. This is the podcast for the City Steading Brews YouTube channel. I'm Brian.
I'm Derica.
Let's get fortified. I didn't know what to say there.
All right. So first off, we're going to talk about fortification and dilution and what we're actually talking about. So that way we have a basis for further communication.
Right. Now, fortification is essentially, it's usually, okay, because there's no always and there's no never. It's usually when you use a spirit added to something else to bump up the ABV. Like if you had something that was, say, 10% and you wanted to bump it up to 15%, after it's already done, you can add, vodka or Everclear or something like that, and you can bump up that ABV. Obviously, when you do that, you are actually diluting the brew itself with more alcohol, but you can sometimes have good effects because of fortification, and that's something that we'll talk about in a minute. Dilution is basically the other way around. It's like adding water to something to take that 10% down to 8 or 7 or 6. These are just numbers. I'm not saying they're exact things or anything like that. There's different reasons for doing each of them.
This comes up a lot in comments when we add a product to something we're fermenting after primary fermentation is done, right. Whether we're sweetening it with fruit or back sweetening it with honey or any other ingredient. The addition of those products is diluting the overall alcohol percentage of that brew. And so people were really concerned about just how much the dilution was.
And there's some calculations that we can do, and I'll show you how to do them. It's actually the same calculation for both, at least the way I do it. You can use a Pearson square to do this, and that's not something I'm actually that familiar with, so I just do it my way, the parts method, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. But some reasons to fortify, let's talk about that. Like, why would you want to fortify?
One of my personal favorite reasons to fortify something is for flavor.
Yeah, it adds flavors. Like, say you wanted to add a spiced rum flavor to something. You can totally just add spiced rum. I've heard of people adding whiskeys to meads. I don't know that I would do that. I actually like my mead and I like my whiskey, but I don't really know that I want them mixed together. But I have been known to fortify with lots of different things. Brandy is actually wonderful in mead. Rum is another really good one. That's when you're going for flavors. Now, you can also technically fortify something that's lower ABV with something that's higher ABV. Like, for instance, say you had a 5% cider. You could fortify that with a 12% mead. It's still technically fortification, and it still serves the purpose. If you want the flavors from the mead into the cider, it actually serves a purpose.
Another reason to fortify something is for stabilization.
Right. Before we get to stabilization, though, I actually kind of already said it. It's to raise the ABV. Sometimes you just want a higher ABV. Like, for instance, dense Mead. Viking's Blood, the original, they serve them in like you've seen it. Everybody knows what dense Mead products are. They actually fortify, and they do it for an interesting reason that I'll get to in just a second, but they do it to raise the ABV as well, so they can say they're serving an 18% mead, okay? To do it for preservation, that's kind of why they do it, and that's why I brought it up. They make I believe it's 12 to 14% mead. They actually ferment it to 12 to 14%. And then they add a neutral spirit to it to raise the ABV past what the yeast can ferment in, and that way they can back sweeten the heck out of things and it won't re-ferment.
And this goes back to yeast properties and specifically a yeast's alcohol tolerance. So they have in their environment, where they're comfortable to do their job of fermenting, they only have so much of their waste product, alcohol, that they're tolerant to.
Right.
And this varies depending on the different type of strains that are created in labs. And some of them are bred.
It's a guideline too.
Some of them are bred to be more tolerant so that they can create more alcohol. And some of them are bred to be less tolerant, particularly cider and ale yeast.
Like SO4, for instance, I think it's actually marked between 9 and 11. Whereas like EC1118 and K1V1116 are 18%.
So if you take those tolerance numbers into consideration when fortifying and you go well past their tolerance.
2, 3, 4, percent past it.
Full pointage here, not just the point oh something.
Yeah.
Like a full point.
Because yeast can't read. They don't know that they're supposed to stop at 14 or 15.
Right. And so you want to have a margin of safety. Otherwise, you can't say for sure that your brew is stable through the fortification method.
Now, something that's important here is, I may not have mentioned it, but I did. The order of operation is important. You want to wait till your brew is done fermenting, then fortify, then sweeten. If you try to fortify an active fermentation, it probably won't work. It might, but it might stall, which means it could kick up again later. It kind of leaves it in limbo. It's not the best way to go. I mean, I know some people have done it that way. I wouldn't trust it though.
No,
I don't think that's the best thing to do. I'd rather it be done and know, because here's the other thing. If it's still fermenting, you don't really know what the alcohol level is or anything like that. So it's kind of it's like Schrodinger's brew. You don't really want that because it is still fermenting and it's not fermenting at the same time. So I'd much rather it be done. Now it is finished.
If you do decide to stop an active fermentation, make sure you rack it really good, maybe a couple of times, and then add your spirit and then let it sit under airlock for
and see what happens.
Considerable amount of time just to be extra sure. And the reason why we stress these type of things so much is that we don't want you to have a bottle bomb. And that's if fermentation continues fermenting, its process is going to create more alcohol for you, but it's also going to create more gases. And if that is in a closed bottled environment, kaboom is going to happen.
Now, I know someone's going to say this. Port wine is actually made where they stop the fermentation early by fortifying. So it can work, but here's the thing. You have to have a very precise process, and port can be much higher ABV too. So just to give an idea, let's say you have a 12% tolerant yeast and you made a wine that can go to say 15%, but you stop it at around 12 by fortifying up to say 17 or 18%. Yeah, that's probably going to work.
Even in those circumstances, I would still suggest that you let it sit
Leave it under
airlock
let it
for
stay.
a couple of months just to be certain.
Right. Whereas if you're going the safe route, you can actually, like, say, using that same example, you can let that brew out to say 14 or even 15% using say a 15% tolerant yeast, and then you can fortify it to 17 or 18. And now you're getting more of the wine or the brew and less of the spirit, but now you've surpassed what the yeast can do by about 3%. So you should probably be fine. Keep in mind, when you fortify like that, I would still leave it under airlock and let it sit. Same as if you tried to stop fermentation. Always, always, always err on the side of caution. Make sure that it's not going to re-ferment.
Right. And this is something that we probably don't stress enough in our recipe videos, is that regardless of what our process is for our brews, we always let them sit afterwards under airlock for an extended amount of time.
Months.
For multiple reasons. One, the safety reason that I mentioned before. And two, lots of times they will clear and release more sediment. So that way, when you finally get to bottling, you have a cleaner beverage.
They degas too. So, you know, there's no harm in leaving it under airlock unless you're using little tiny airlocks that tend to dry out. I've heard from several people that they had issues with that. We have had stuff under airlock like S-type and 3-piece that have been going for 6 months, 8 months. We had one that was like 11 months. We never refilled the airlock. We never needed to. And that's in our environment, which is considerably warmer than most people. So I don't understand. Unless the airlocks are really, really tiny or you're using straight water. That may be a difference.
I believe
sanitizer fluid probably won't evaporate as fast.
Right.
I know when we were using like, you know, Scoresby Scotch or clear liquors, they don't evaporate nearly as fast. So that could be it too.
That said, I do always check our airlocks. I have refilled a couple of airlocks.
I stand corrected.
Of all the years we've been brewing, I've maybe refilled 4.
Oh, okay. So not much. Not much. So it is still quite the rare.
But it's something you want to just keep an eye on regardless.
So we covered higher ABV, flavor, and stabilization. That's pretty much the reasons to fortify, because anything else is just a variation on that same theme. So why would we dilute?
Again, flavor.
Yep.
If you want something to be sweeter, if we want something to have more fruit, if we want something to have more acid, and we weren't going with an acid blend, a powder option.
Well, I can give a great example. Our our Arnold Palmer, now I got it.
Yeah.
She had problems saying Arnold in that video. Our Arnold Palmer mead, we actually diluted. We brewed it to, I don't know if it was like 8 or 10%, something like that. And then we added the lemon juice to it, which diluted it back a little bit. And that was done intentionally. We meant to do that, to show the technique. And that's something I don't know that we're clear enough on in some of our videos, is we sometimes will actually design a recipe around showing a new method or a new way of doing things, or an alternative method, because there is no one way to everything. You can make things so many different ways using so many different methods. It's all good. I don't have any problem with any of that. Some of them are better than others, but sometimes it comes down to personal preference. Sometimes it comes down to what you have available. Sometimes it comes down to how much trouble you feel like going through. So all those things together make the homebrewing process a very interesting and rewarding experience, because you can make literally the same end product probably 20 different ways using all different methods and end up with roughly the same thing. I think that's actually kind of cool. And 20 was just an estimate. It might be 100. I don't know. But dilution, probably not as common. It happens by accident. Like Derica mentioned before, when we're back sweetening or we're adding fruit afterwards, we are diluting that. Now, we get asked, it's come up a lot in the last couple of weeks. That's part of why we're doing this video. People will say like, oh, you added, a pound of fruit to that gallon after the fact, but you're still saying that it's X amount of ABV. Wouldn't it be a lot lower? Well,
it would be lower, but not necessarily a lot lower. And we're going to get more into calculations and how with any calculation that you're doing with homebrew, it's always an estimate.
Yeah.
But we're continuing on the discussion of why you would dilute something. So flavor was the first one.
To lower the ABV.
To lower the ABV is certainly
if you ever wanted to. There's
Sometimes
reasons.
We've had brews that just come out a little hot on the flavor. And that's because the alcohol presence is overpowering maybe some of the nuances of the flavor of the underlying ingredients of the brew. And in those cases, we would probably want to dilute it with something either that it was from the original making of the brew, or for something that we feel complements or will enhance the flavors that are hiding underneath that alcohol burn.
Okay. The other reason is more like blending. Like, let's say you have something that's too sweet and you have something that's too dry. You can blend them together. That's technically not diluting, but you are diluting the sweetness and you are technically diluting the dryness of the other one.
And if they're not exactly the same ABV, then there is going to be a bit of dilution.
Well, then one of them is being diluted and the other one's being fortified.
It's
at the same time.
Mind blown.
But that's interesting. Another thing that dilution is really good for, and this is going to be a tip that you're going to want to know, and that is if you over-cloved, if you put in too much spice. Clove is the biggest problem here that I hear about. Like somebody will say, I accidentally put in half a cup of clove into a gallon batch. What should I do? Usually my first instinct is dump it out. Oh my God, that's just insane. But even like we say literally like 1, 2, maybe 3 cloves in a gallon. I've heard of people putting in 30 and 40 and 50. And it just is way too much at the end.
If you put that much clove into a brew and you didn't want to dump it out, I would say save that. And anytime you wanted to add any clove essence to further brews,
anything,
just use a little bit of
like
that.
A tablespoon of it at a time?
That's now a clove tincture, if you will.
Yeah, pretty much.
Add a little
but one way to lessen the effect of that, and this works for spices, this works for capsaicin, like spicy things. Clove is just the first thing that came to mind. You can mix that with something that's more neutral. Like say you made a heavily cloved or heavily spiced mead that you just thought was too spicy, and you have another, just a plain old traditional that, even if it's nice, blending those together, you can lessen the effect of those spices and possibly make something that falls in between that's really pleasant to drink. So that is still, I would consider that dilution. You're not diluting the ABV necessarily, because what if they were the same? Sure. But you're diluting the flavors and the essence that's in there, making something much more pleasant. And okay, this is something that came up recently. We made that jackfruit mead and we dumped it out. Yep. Okay, it's no secret. A few people actually gave us a really hard time about it because they were like, "Oh, you could have blended that. You could have done this. You could have done." Here's the thing: like Derica said about the tincture of clove, we would have had to make it literally where we can add an ounce of this to a glass of 8 ounces of something else. But then we're just stretching it out. It didn't taste good. There was nothing we could do to make it taste good. It was not a flavor we ever wanted to have. It wasn't like it was too much of something. It didn't taste good.
Right. And that's a good thing to keep in mind when you're trying to create something. If you have a flavor that's just too strong, but you still appreciate that flavor,
right,
then go ahead and blend. That's worthy of a blend.
Exactly.
If you have a flavor that you absolutely do not like, then you can throw everything plus the kitchen sink at it, and it's still probably not going to taste very good.
Right.
So I would rather caution you not to waste more product on trying to salvage something that's just not for you in the first place. And
that was the idea that I was trying to get across in that video, is that we could have added a ton more honey, a ton more spices, a ton more other things just to cover up the flavor we didn't like. But to me, that's just wasting it. I would much rather make something new using those ingredients that we're going to appreciate rather than trying to so hard to overcorrect on something that we just didn't like.
Yeah. If there was a specific aspect of that particular brew that we both really enjoyed and just other elements were getting in the way, then yes, we totally would have blended it and added other things to it to increase our pleasure of the brew.
And I really couldn't understand why people were being so hard on us, because I think in the whole history of the show, we've only had that happen once or twice out of a couple 100 brews. So, I mean, that's a pretty good track record. If you only end up
that and Metal Mead.
if you really just end up not liking 1% of the things you make, I think you're doing a great job.
Winning.
That's awesome. Because all the others, there was something about them that we liked enough that we saved them, and they were able to be used, whether in a cocktail or mixed with other things or just diluted down with ice, or, there's so many different ways that you can do it that you don't have to dump it. Unless it's something that you just go, there is no redeeming qualities here. There's just nothing here that I'm going to like just no matter what. If all you can do is put in like a tablespoon into a glass to thin it out, to make it stretch, you're not making that work. You're not blending. You're diluting that to a point that you don't notice it anymore. In other words, you're just covering it up. So what's the point? That's my take on it. I mean, your mileage may vary. I don't want to tell somebody to dump something out if they don't want to. But don't feel bad if you get to a point where you just go, this is just, I will never drink this. I will never use this. It's okay. It's fine. But we're still talking about dilution. We get all off on these tangents. And
I think we covered all the reasons of why.
It's not as common. It's less to common.
Dilute. And there's a lot of crossover with dilution and fortification.
Sure.
Because
they're the same thing.
It's basically whenever you're adding something to something else, you're changing it in some fashion.
Right.
So
we need to do some math.
That brings us to math, which means Brian's going to have to do all the talking now.
Okay.
So his concept of parts makes this really easy, even for people like me that just don't get math.
Right.
And that's because you're going to have different parts in your final amount that are going to make up the final volume of your final amount. And so if you can designate those parts and what their ABV is that's what we're going to do the calculations for, that's going to help make the formula be much more simple.
Let's just do a very, very simple method of using the part system. And okay, I have a calculator the teacher said I would never have handy. I have it right here because you probably need to use a calculator for this. But let's say you have 1 gallon of a 10% mead.
So that's 1 U.S. gallon.
Right, U.S. gallon, 3.75 liters to be exact. And you have a quart of a 40% neutral spirit. Okay, so that means you have 4 quarts in the gallon and 1 quart of the neutral spirit, making 5 parts altogether. But what you want to do is take your 4 parts times the percentage, which is 10%, is 40. Then we have 1 part at 40%, so that's also 40 plus 40. That gives me 80. Now I take that and I divide it by the total number of parts, which is now 5, 4 plus 1, So divided by 5. Our new ABV is 16%. That's it. That's how simple it is. If you're diluting something, it's the other way around. Let's say we had something that was 10% and we had 4 quarts of that and we have 1 quart of water. Now water is 0, so that changes things. And it could be water, it could be fruit juices, anything like that that has 0 alcohol. That's how this works. So 4 parts times our 10% again, is 40. But now there's nothing to add. You can add +0, but it's not going to change anything on your calculator. But we now have 5 parts. So divide that by 5, and our new ABV is 8%. That's it. That's how hard it is. Now, when I say parts, those parts could be cups, ounces, milliliters, liters, gallons, barrels, whatever, handfuls, whatever system you want to use. As long as you use the same one across the board, it all works. I tend to use ounces a lot because it gives a little fine precision and it works really, really well, especially if I need to hit a specific ABV. But sometimes we're just doing it for flavor. So if that's the case, I'm just going to add it until I like it. And sometimes I don't even worry about the ABV if it wasn't important. There are times that you're trying to surpass a yeast tolerance, and that's when it's important to take really good measurements. If you're not, and you're just playing mad chemist and blending stuff together that's already stable, have at it. Doesn't really matter.
Now, there is one question that is asked of us frequently that we honestly don't have an answer for, and I can't really think of a way to come up with an answer for it other than lab tests. And that's when we add fruit.
Okay. And here's why. If I have a gallon of a 10% brew, right? And we add, say, 2 pounds of cherries. Now, I can calculate how much sugar's in those cherries, and I can add that to the gravity, but how much liquid came out of them? We can't know exactly. And
how much liquid was retained in the cherries when we racked it off?
Right.
Don't know that either.
And even the sugars, we can't know that all the sugars got extracted or even all the sugars fermented. So it's very, very difficult to do it. And that's why, like something like that, unless it's a severe amount of dilution, I just don't worry about it because I see it as kind of a net loss. You're adding in this volume, but you're probably taking most of it back out again. So probably not changing it by much. Someone's going to tell me that they have a calculation for it and everything, and that's cool. But to me, if I make something that's 10% or 12%, and then I add fruit to it, and afterwards it might only be 9 or 11% or 13% or whatever, I don't really care. It doesn't really matter to me because at the end of the day, and I will stand on the hill, and this is the hill I will die on. I don't care if it's 12% or 13%. It makes no difference to me, 12 versus 13, even 12 versus 14 or 15. Makes no difference to me whatsoever, as long as all of the safety guidelines have been met, meaning it's high enough that it can probably preserve itself fairly well and that kind of thing, which is to say almost anything, really, if you bottle it well. Like we've had beers and ciders now. We used to say they're only good for a few months. That's not true. We've had them for years. And as long as you bottle it properly, it's all good. It doesn't really go bad that quickly or that easily. You really have to mess up. That's the truth. So even that isn't all that crucial to me anymore. I look at flavor. That's really what we're here for. If all you want is the highest ABV, just go buy whiskey or vodka and mix it into something. I mean, that's the easiest way to do it. Most people that do this hobby for the love of making things. Every once in a while, I get somebody that says, "Oh, you're overcomplicating it. Just go get vodka and grape juice and mix them together." That's pretty much how I read those too.
You're not homebrewing.
Yeah, that's not homebrewing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing that, but what's the point? You know, like if that's what you want to do, go have at it. But that's not a suggestion that actually makes any sense on a channel like this. Now, adding vodka to a wine that you made can make sense depending on what your intended result is. And I think that's what a lot of people miss with fortification is what's your intent?
Yeah.
Because like people will ask, when should I add this? When should I add that? Well, it depends what you want. Depends what's going on. If you want to add a flavor of rum to something, add rum. If you don't want rum, don't add rum. If you want to raise the ABV, but you don't want the rum flavor, now use Everclear or vodka. And that's kind of where it comes down to. We did a joke mead that actually came out awesome.
Your 30%.
30% ABV mead, which, okay, I'll be totally honest. And a few people pointed this out that because of the way dilution works, we probably didn't actually get 30%. I actually did more math and talked with a couple other people. It was like 29.2 or something like that. I mean, come on. It was so close. Who cares? Even legally, we could have put 30% on the bottle.
Sure.
According to the way the law works. So don't get silly on me. It was just a joke to prove a point about fortification. That's all it was. But it actually came out really good. So it worked. But that is an extreme example of fortification because at a certain point, and I think we were at that point or close to it, you have more fortifying agents than original brew, which there's a tipping point where it's no longer fortified. Now you just added mead to a spirit. Like now it's a cocktail, basically. And I would even say our 30% was probably, it was a cocktail, essentially. And I think we said that in the video. But that was just for fun, but it actually worked out really, really well. And that still worked off the same principle. I remember scrambling to find various whatever spirits we had lying around to add to get it to 30%.
We looked a lot to find high proof rum, I think it was, in the store. And then even when we added that, I think we had to top it off with Everclear because we still didn't
that's
get
right.
the
We were a little short.
Yep.
So that's the math involved in doing it. And for me, it's a little bit of trial and error. I'm sure there is a way to reverse engineer that process to make it where you know exactly how many ounces to add. I usually take a guess, get in the ballpark, and then adjust as necessary to get it where I need it to be. But just to be clear, fortification, there's nothing wrong with doing it at all, especially if it's your own brew and you like it. Who cares? If somebody doesn't like it, don't give them any. It's just that simple. And dilution, we were talking about the fruit thing again. And this is where it gets super tricky because we can't really know. So if you dilute it to a point where there's sugars left and you're under the tolerance of your yeast for alcohol, it could re-ferment, but you're always, always, always covered. If you just leave it for a while under airlock, you'll know if it fermented more. And that's kind of like the Band-Aid for all of this.
Sure.
That is, if you fortify, if you dilute, and you're not sure if it's going to ferment more or if if it's going to ferment more, always put it under airlock, and then it doesn't matter if it ferments more. It's totally safe. I hear so many people that they fortify something, put a cap on it. I'm like, whoa, you want to put that under airlock just to be safe. Oh, but I put enough in. And they're like 1% over the tolerance of the yeast. Have you met 71B before?
Yeast can't read.
Yeah. 71B is designed for 14%. We have literally had it go to 17 and 18%. So if I was going to fortify 71B, it's 21, 22.
Yeah.
And at that point, I'd feel relatively safe. I'd still put it under airlock.
We still put it under airlock and let it sit for a while.
The best way, if you really want to fortify something and not have it go sky high numbers or have to use a lot of the spirit to do it, is use a lower tolerance yeast like SO4 or any of the ale yeast or cider yeast that usually are lower. There's a couple of cider yeasts out there that are like 18%. If you use a lower tolerance, that way you don't have to fortify it to the moon. You can fortify it to 15, 16%, and it'll probably be fine.
Now, in these cases, we're mentioning a fortifying as an alternative method of stabilization.
Right.
So if you used another method of stabilization,
that's true.
Then you could fortify for simply adding flavor or upping the ABV without worrying about it too much.
The one thing you want to be careful of, and this doesn't have to do with fortification so much as just an in general practice. If you use like pasteurization to stabilize a mead and you decide you want to back sweeten with honey, my suggestion is back sweeten, then pasteurize because the wild yeast in honey could restart that fermentation. So like, let's say you had a 10% mead that you wanted sweeter, but you also wanted to fortify it. But your yeast is good to like 18%. You don't want to have it at 18% though. That's where you have to be careful because now what you need to do is take that 10%, sweeten it to taste, which you're trying to sweeten to taste as best you can, and then fortify it all at the same time. So you're going to fortify and sweeten all at the same time and then pasteurize it. Yes, you may lose a little bit of the alcohol just because it's a higher proof, but you're not going to lose that much.
Well, couldn't you back sweeten, then pasteurize, then fortify? Yes.
The problem there, though, is now you're sweetening to taste, but you don't know what it's going to taste like because of the fortification. So you can totally do that and guess, and then use the fortifying agent to get your sweetness level that you want. Another option is don't use honey to sweeten.
Yeah.
Anything else that doesn't have a natural yeast in it, is going to be fine for sweetening, like sugars, maple syrup, agave, things like that. They tend to not have it. We don't really use the non-fermentable sugars anymore. I know some people still love them and all that. It's just a personal preference. We'd rather not use them. I've read some questionable things about many of them and just not something I care to use anymore.
So hopefully, if nothing else you've taken from this talk is that all of these things have a multitude of if-then clauses.
Oh, yeah.
So there's not one solution for every situation. You just have to understand each part of it and then use that tool when it's the most applicable.
And I did come up with a reason to use always and never. Always put an airlock on if you fortify or dilute, and never just put a cap on it right after you fortify or dilute. I know I cheated. It's the same thing, but still, you get what I'm saying. That is going to save your butt every single time, no matter what. You'll be fine. And if you run into a situation where you're not sure what you want to do, and you're doing something, and you're not sure if this is how you should do it, you can always ask us. We do answer our comments and questions on all of our channels, and you can ask us, and we'll do the best we can to give you an answer. If you do ask a question like that, though, please take the time, write out the full recipe, the times, the readings, everything that you've done, all the ingredients. That way, I can help you with one answer rather than having to say, oh, what did you do with this? What about this? What about this? And then we go back and forth and back and forth. And before you know it, like 2 weeks have gone by and neither of us remember what we were talking about in the first place.
And the brew's already drunk.
Yeah, it's already gone, But if you have any questions about this topic, please leave them in the comments below. We're happy to try to help more. The math can be a little bit weird sometimes. We just try to keep it as simple as we possibly can.
Also, if there's another topic that you'd like us to discuss, let us know in the comments below.
And as always, guys, thank you for listening and have a great day.
Bye-bye.